In this video, I'm going to show how you can build an Upwork style payment flow into your Bubble app using Stripe Connect. You can see here I'm looking to hire this freelancer for $80 an hour for 5 hours. And when I click on this hire button, I'm brought to this really nice Stripe checkout page where I can make a payment for those 5 hours. Now, there's obviously going to be a gap between when I pay this $400 and when the service is delivered. And you may not wish to release this $400 until the service has been completed. So there's two things we can do. The first approach is we can use this authorize and capture method, whereby the customer's payment details are captured immediately on this checkout session page, but the payment doesn't actually go through. So there's a bit of delay. They might give their payment details here for say $100 in this example, but it's not until the service is completed that the payment is captured and is then automatically split between the freelancer, who gets 80% of the payment in this example, and the platform, who will get 20%. You do need to activate this capture at a later date using a workflow, which I'm going to show you in a bit. That's the first approach, the authorize and capture method. The second method is the separate charges and transfer method. This is where the $100 is taken immediately. So under this scenario, if I pay the $400 here, this leaves my account straight away. But what happens is it goes fully to the actual platform account. So rather than being split, like happens in authorize and capture between the freelancer and the platform, it goes to the platform account straight away, but it's then held on the platform account. And then after the service is completed, $80 is transferred to the freelancer. There are pros and cons to both of these methods, and I'm actually going to go through them now before we actually start building out workflows in our Bubble editor. Maybe going back to the authorize and capture method, which is actually what we have here. So I might just fill these details out so you can see what this looks like on the Stripe side. Okay, so I have those payment details in, and I'm going to pay for that $400 worth of digital marketing services. And then if we go into our Bubble app, I'll come back to this dashboard now, but if we go into our Stripe dashboard, I should say, and we look at payments, qualified is just the name of an app I previously had, you can see here that $400 payment has gone through, but it's uncaptured. That means the payment details have been authorized, but the payment itself hasn't gone through. And then at a later stage, what we can do is we can click this pay button here, and that'll actually authorize the payment. And if we click on this now, you'll see here the payment status change is succeeded, job complete has gone to yes. And if we refresh our Stripe dashboard, what you'll see is the payment has now succeeded. And if we go into collected fees, we'll see that the platform is getting $80 of this, and the remaining $320 has been transferred to Brandon Jones's account for his freelance services. Now, this does look like a very clean method, and I do like it, but there's a number of pros and cons to consider. The pros are very much that it's very simple and straightforward. You put in your payment details. When the job is complete, you trigger the payment and it goes through. You don't have to worry about holding funds on the platform account and then deciding how much to split between you and the freelancer. The cons are you can only use this method if the service is going to be delivered in 7 days or less. If we look at the relevant Stripe page for this method, you can see there it's called placing a payment on hold. We're separating out the payment authorization and the capture. You'll see here that by default the authorization expires in 7 days. So this may be suitable if you're running a service like an Uber, where you want to split the payment between the driver and the platform, but the service is going to be delivered very soon after the customer has put in their details. It's not really going to be as useful for things like Upwork, where the service may be delivered, a couple of weeks or even longer after the customer initially pays. The other con is that there's always the fear that the customer puts in their payment details on day one, but by the time the payment is captured, say 5 or 6 days later, they may have cancelled their card, they may not have the adequate funds in the account. That'll cause an error and it just leads to a couple of difficulties. So I recommend this approach really if you're running a marketplace where the service is going to be delivered very soon after the payment details have been provided. Let's move on to our second method. So this is the separated charges and transfer method. And like I said, the customer is going to pay for the service immediately. So for example, back in our Upwork freelancer marketplace, we paid Brandon Jones $100 immediately for his services, even though they haven't been delivered as of yet. I know in this example I said job was complete, but it's obviously going to take some time for him to deliver his service. So what happens is that $100 is going to go directly to the platform account. I think at this stage maybe it's better if I go through an example of this. Okay, so we're back on our Upwork style freelancing marketplace homepage. This time we're going to hire Brandon Jones for, let's say, 10 hours this time. So the total bill is going to be $800. And we're brought to the Stripe checkout page. It looks identical to the previous one, but there's something different going on underneath the hood here. So let me just put in my dummy details quickly. Okay, now let's pay for that $800. And if we go to our Stripe dashboard, what we should see now is if we refresh our page, we should see an $800 charge come through here. And you can see that has indeed gone through. But what's important here is this is entirely gone to the platform. This has not been transferred to Brandon Jones's connected account at all. And we can verify that by going to connect, by finding his account, which should be under enabled. You can see that's it there. And you can see there under payments, he has not received his cut of that $800, which would be about 80% of $800, 640 or so. But we can do to trigger that is if we go back to our Bubble dashboard, all of the $800 is currently residing in the platform account. But let's say we're happy that Brandon has completed the job. What we can do is we can click this transfer button. And once we click that, we're going to make a transfer from the platform account to the connected account. So if we go back to Brandon's connected account here, refresh, what we'll see under payments is that he's now got that $640. So end result is quite similar, but we're just getting there in a different way. So now that we've gone over the two approaches, I think it's probably time to start building out workflows in our Bubble editor. I'm going to start off by quickly looking at our database. We have a number of custom fields here in addition to the standard user type. Maybe just starting on the standard user type first of all. You'll see here we have an hourly rate. That's how much the freelancers charge per hour. It's a number. We have the name of the freelancer, a profile image, all quite standard. For a role, they can either be a client or they can be a freelancer. So the people who are selling their services on the marketplace are freelancers, and the people who are purchasing are customers. Service, that's just the name of the service they're selling. So in Brandon's case, it was digital marketing. It could be development. It could be whatever you have on your particular service marketplace. And this is really important here. This is the seller account ID. This is the unique Stripe account ID for the merchant. So this is important. Throughout this tutorial, I'm assuming that you've already integrated Stripe Connect into your Bubble app and that you've onboarded your merchants. If you do not know how to do that, I have another video on the exact steps you need to take to do it. I'll link to it below. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm assuming you've already done that, and I'm really just going to focus on the delayed payment flow like you might see in a freelancing marketplace. Let's take a look now at our other two data types. The first one is transaction, and we're going to create a new transaction every time someone pays for a good or service on our freelancing marketplace. You can see here we have the amount, which is a number, and it's the value of the transaction. So I should note that I typically store these values in cents. So for example, if you look at the most recent transaction here, you can see there the $800 is actually coming in as 80,000 cents. Stripe prefers to take values in cents, which is why I typically store my amount values in cents. Checkout session ID is going to be linked to the unique checkout session that we create. Payment intent ID will be a way that we can track the transaction over time along with payment intent status. And seller account ID here is exactly the same as what we have under our user type here. Job is the third data type in our database. Quite simple. It's linked to the transaction data type. So once a transaction is created, a job is also going to be created. We have a client who is going to be a user. You might remember under our user data type, we have this field here called role, and they can either be a client or a freelancer. We have complete, which is yes or no. By default, it's set to no. We have the cost, which again is exactly the same as the amount under transaction. We're also linking it to a freelancer. So every job is going to have both a client and a freelancer, both users. And then finally, as I mentioned it, we're linking it to specific transactions. If I go into my database and look at the most recent job, you can see here it's linked to this particular transaction. And if you just see the last few digits, you can see it finishes in 700. And if we go back into our transaction and we look at the most recent one, you'll see its unique ID ends in 700. Therefore, the two are linked. Throughout the rest of this tutorial, we're going to be using a plugin. It's the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin. You can add this plugin to your Bubble app by clicking on the Add Plugins button and searching for Stripe Connect Marketplace, and it should show up. It is a paid plugin developed by Cranford Tech, myself, and it comes with extensive documentation. You can see here It gives a list of all the features you can implement. There are several tutorial videos on how to use it, and there's also a very comprehensive demo app that comes with sample workflows, that comes with the various features you can implement. So this is something you'll need to install if you want to follow the rest of the steps in this tutorial. Once you have it installed, you're going to need to input a few API keys. You can see here I have all my test mode keys in. You get these on your Stripe developers dashboard. If you go to developers in your Stripe account, click on API keys, and you can start off by copying the publishable key, which you're going to paste into here. You can just delete that, and again, we're going to paste it in. And then for the other two fields, we want the secret key. So again, if we go back to our dashboard, click on reveal test key for the secret key, copy that, go back to our plugin section, get rid of that, paste the one we've just copied in there. And then for the API key, it's exactly the same, but the only difference is you need to type the word bearer and a space before you paste it in. So again, just for demonstration purposes, I'll recreate it. We'll type in the word bearer, space, and then paste in our secret key once again. Once you've done that, your plugin is good to go. So the way I've built out the workflows for creating a payment is I have this page called Freelancer, and the type of content on this is a user. And what I'm basically doing is I'm setting the content on the page to be equal to whatever freelancer you clicked on. So in Brandon's example, which we might just go back and take a look at, you'll see here that all of his details are coming through on this freelancer page. That's his hourly rate, that's his name, that's his profile image. And then when we click on the hire button, this is where things get important. And I'm actually going to recreate all of these steps just because it is the key part of this tutorial. So I'm just going to delete all these. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new thing, and that thing is going to be a transaction. Now, there are a number of fields here that we're going to want to fill out, but we're not going to do that right now. It may seem strange, but we're actually going to leave this transaction blank at the moment because we're going to reference it in a second in another action. The second thing we're going to do is we are going to create another new thing, and that thing is going to be a job. Now, there are some fields here we can fill out. For example, the client is going to be the current user. Complete, we're going to leave as no. The cost is going to equal to the number of hours multiplied by the hourly rate for the freelancer. So the way we can access this is we can say input number of hours, its value, which will get us to, for example, in this case, 5. We then want to access the 80, and we can do that by going to multiplied by current pages user, which will be the freelancer, their hourly rate. And then this is important, we also want to multiply this by 100, because as I reminded you earlier, Stripe prefer to get things in cents. So if we were to exclude this multiply by 100, we'd simply have 5 by 80, which would be 400, but it'd be 400 cents. So we obviously want much more. We actually want 40,000 cents in this case, and that's why we're multiplying it by 100. The freelancer is going to be equal to the current page users, and just leave it like that. That's going to reference Brandon in this particular example. And then finally, we're going to set the transaction to be equal to the result of step 1. So that's one of the reasons we created that in step 1, but didn't actually do anything with it. Because we've installed the Stripe Marketplace plugin, we're going to have access to a bunch of these actions here. And the one that we want at the moment is the Stripe Connect Create Checkout Session. You can see here there's a very similar one below it that has to do with subscriptions. That's not what we're after here. We're doing a one-off payment, so we're going to use this particular action. There's a bunch of fields that we want to fill out here. Success URL is where the user is going to be redirected to after they've completed the transaction. In my case, I want to send them to the dashboard that we saw earlier. And if I just go here and type in dashboard, we'll see that page again. So what I can do is I could just take this URL and I could put it in here. But what I prefer to do is actually insert dynamic data, search for this website home URL, which will bring us to the index page, which will be, in our example here, this URL. And then I also want to add in dashboard. You do not need to put a slash at the end of that. Bubble is smart enough to know that there'll automatically be one at the end of that. So that'll navigate us to the dashboard. I'm going to make an additional change to this in a minute, but I'm not going to do it just yet. If For the cancel URL, it's very similar. It's where the user is redirected to if they decided to cancel the payments mid-payment flow. In my case, I'm going to send them to exactly the same place. Stripe account ID. So this is the unique Stripe account ID of our freelancer, which is Brandon in this case. So you'll see in the database, I already have his Stripe account ID saved down. This is it here. So what I can do is I can simply reference current page user Stripe account ID, or seller account ID is what I have it as. The platform fee in cents. So this is how much of the transaction we want to go to the platform. I'm going to take 20% of this transaction and give it to my freelancing marketplace. So what I'll say is we're going to recreate the same value that we got here under cost. So I'm going to go to input number of hours, which will get us to 5 or whatever we put in. I'm going to multiply that by Brandon's hourly rate. So current pages user hourly rate. And then once again, I need to make sure I multiply it by 100 to get to the correct amount in cents. And then finally, if I'm going to take 20%, I'm going to multiply that again by 0.2. The price in cents is quite easy. We're just going to copy what we did here in platform fee, paste it in, but we're not going to multiply it by the 0.2. We're going to take that off the end. So if, for example, we did go with 5 hours here, we'd have 5 by 80, which is 400, which would come through here. And then in platform fee, we'd get 20% of that, and that would be the platform fee. Quantity, going to leave as 1. Currency, I'm going to leave as USD. Just a note that you do need to include a 3-digit ISO code. So USD for US dollars, EUR for euros. It must also be a currency supported by Stripe, and you can see a full list of supported currencies at that URL that I've referenced in the documentation. The product name. So what's the name of the product that the user is going to see when they're on the Stripe checkout page? What I'm going to say is insert dynamic data, input number of hours, its value. So let's say that's a 5. Then I'm going to say hours. Then I'm going to say a dash, and I'm going to say current pages user service. So the idea here is we might have something like 5 hours digital marketing. On behalf of is an important field. I'm going to come back to it in a minute because I want to focus now on these 2 fields, which are really important and the whole purpose of this tutorial really. So charge type, we have 2 charge types here. We have destination and we have separate charge and transfer. If we do destination, this is how you get to the authorize immediately payment flow. The payments details are taken, they're authorized, but they don't actually go through. And then at a later stage, the payment is captured and split between the freelancer and the platform. So if you want to get that scenario, you leave this as destination, but really importantly, you set the authorize only to yes. We'll come on to it in a minute, but if you wanted to go down the separate charge and transfer route, you would simply change the charge type from destination to separate charge and transfer. This is an optional field here, Stripe Customer ID. I won't go through that now, but you can take a look at the documentation there. And then just before we move on to our next step, I want to touch briefly on this on behalf of, because it is quite important. It's only relevant if we are using destination charges. This is not really relevant if you're doing separate charge and transfer, but we obviously are using destination charges right now. So if you set this to no, the platform is the business of record for the payment. So in my example, I have an app here called Qualified. So if I set this to no, then Qualified is going to be the person you are transacting with. This will not work if the platform and the connected accounts are registered in different countries or regions. So for example, Qualified, which is an Irish registered business, if that was one of the parties and then the seller was registered in the US, you would not be able to set this to no. If you set this to yes, you can do that, but the business of record that the customer will be transacting with, it will not be Qualified, it will be whatever the merchant's business name is. So I highly recommend you read a bit more about this. You can see there I've linked to the relevant Stripe documentation. In my example, I'm going to leave this as no for now because both of my parties are registered in the same area. Okay, so I really want to highlight again, these are the relevant fields that we're really focusing in on when we're talking about 2 methods of delaying a payment, authorize and capture, and separate charges and transfer. And right now, because we've set the charge type to be destination and we set authorize to be yes, that is how we're getting to this scenario here. Okay, so let's go to our 4th step, which is going to be make changes to a thing. The thing we're going to be changing is a transaction that we created in step 1. And we can change a few fields now. So we can change the amount to be equal to result of step 3, its amount. We can change the checkout session ID to be equal to the result of step 3 checkout session ID. We cannot currently change the payment intent ID or the payment intent status, but we can add the seller account ID by simply getting current page users seller account ID. And then finally, the last step in this flow is that we're going to navigate to an external website, and that website is going to be the result of step 3, its URL. Let's try this out. We're trying to get to this scenario here, authorize and capture, where we will see a payment being authorized, but it will not be actually captured straight away. Let's refresh our page here. So we'll put that in, hire him. Once again, brought to the Stripe checkout page. Going to put in my dummy details. Okay, and you can see Leo DiCaprio at testmail.com is what we have in there. Let's pay for that. And what we should see, and you can see it showing up on our dashboard, what we should see is if we go to our Stripe dashboard and we refresh it, we should see a payment there for $240, but it's uncaptured. So again, payment details have been authorized, but it hasn't gone through yet. Now, just so you're aware yourself, what you can do if you want to do this via the dashboard is you can just click capture here, and then that payment will be triggered and the $240 will be taken from the account. We want to do this natively in our Bubble app. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our dashboard, which is a page that we're currently on. And what I have here is a table element, and I'm basically searching for jobs. You might remember that was a data type we had in our database here that's linked to the transaction. It has details on the client, on the freelancer. And what I'm doing is I'm searching for all jobs where the client is the current user. So the current user is only going to be able to see jobs where they are the client. I have some fields in here like the current jobs freelancer's name, whether it's complete or not. You might remember by default that's set to no. Payment intent status, which we don't have at the moment. You'll notice that this field is blank, and I'm going to come on to how do you get that in just a minute. The date on which the job was created, and then finally this transfer button here, which I'm actually going to change. We'll go on to transfer in a bit, but I'm just going to change this to capture. And I'm going to edit this workflow, and I'm going to delete this, and recreate it from scratch. And I'm going to go down to plugins, and then Stripe Connect capture payment is the action we want. And you'll see here we actually need the payment intent to capture the payment. So we need to solve the problem of not having a payment intent ID first of all before we can actually capture the payment. And just to take a look at our database, you'll see here on the most recent transaction, I've just deleted all the other ones to keep it simple, we're missing these two fields, payment intent ID and payment intent status. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the freelancer page where we initially create the checkout session. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this success URL and cancel URL to send specific transaction details to the dashboard page. And then in the background, I'm going to load up the relevant payment intent status and payment intent ID for that transaction. And we're going to achieve this through page URL parameters. And what that means in practice is at the end of the success URL, what you need to do is you need to put in a question mark. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say transaction equals result of step 1, its unique ID. So we're creating a transaction in step 1. You might remember we left it blank. And then in step 3, when we're specifying the success URL, we're taking the unique ID of that transaction and putting it in the success URL. That means that when we go to the dashboard page after completing the transaction, we can then save down the payment intent ID and payment intent status because we can use this information here to run a workflow in the background. We're going to do the same thing for the cancel URL because if they cancel the payment, well, we want to know what the payment intent status and ID is if that happens as well. So again, I'm going to say transaction equals result of step 1, its unique ID. So then what I'm going to do is on the dashboard page, I'm going to say, and you can see I already have it here, but I'm just going to delete it. When page is loaded, and only when get data from page URL, when the parameter name transaction is not empty, so when we do have transaction in the page URL, we're going to do something. And we're going to do two things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make changes to a thing. We're going to do a search for a transaction, and we're going to search for the very first item. Now, this isn't good enough because the first item may not necessarily be the transaction that we're trying to get the data for. Users may be creating transactions at similar times. It's just not a very robust way of doing things. So we're going to add in a constraint here, and we're going to say the unique ID that we're looking for is going to equal to get data from page URL and its transaction. Close that, search here. So we're looking through our database and we're finding the transaction where the unique ID in the page URL is going to be equal to 1 that's in our database. And once we've decided which transaction that we need to change, we can do a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a payment intent ID. That's what we need for the Stripe Connect capture payment. And we're going to get data from an external API. Again, because we've installed the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin, we have access to all of these data calls here. And we are going to retrieve checkout session details. And the checkout session is going to be equal to this transaction's checkout session ID. So again, we're searching for that specific transaction we talked about. We're taking his checkout session ID and we're using that there. And then we can scroll down here. There's a bunch of information you can actually get if you want, but the one we want is the payment intent. Once we have the payment intent, we can do another thing. We can make changes to a thing, and we're actually going to change the exact same transaction. The reason we're breaking it out into a separate step is because it takes a slightly different data call. And what we're going to do is we are going to change the payment intent status to be equal to get data from an external API. This time we're going to use the Stripe Connect get payment details API call. And again, we have the payment intent saved down in step 1. So what we can do is we can say this transaction's payment intent ID, because by the time we get to step 2, we're going to save that down and we can access it there. Then we can click on more and we can go down here to payment, or just called status actually. So we can just get status there. Okay, let's see this in action. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my homepage and I'm going to create one more payment. I'm going to delete the existing transaction just to make things super clear. And we're looking at it in a minute. I'll do the same with job. Perfect. Okay, we'll hire Brandon for what feels like the 14th time. This time we'll just say 4 hours. So it should be a charge of about $320. Once again, at the Stripe checkout page, going to put in my dummy details. Okay, mattdamon@testmail.com is in there now. So let's click on pay, and I want you to watch what's happening in the page URL up here. Okay, so we're being brought to the dashboard page once again, but look what happens here. We have this question mark, and then we have transaction, and that's the unique ID of the transaction that we have just created. You'll also notice that the payment status is now updated because we ran that workflow in the background, which is this one here. We have updated the payment intent ID and the payment intent status for that transaction. So we can now capture the payment. We need to fully build out that workflow though. So what I'm going to do is go back there. You might remember we were using the Stripe Connect capture payment. And what we'll do is we're going to say current rows jobs transactions payment intent ID. So that's going to capture the payment. But if we click this now, we will capture the payment. It will go through and we will split the payment between Brandon between the platform, but we won't know that anything has changed in our bubble database. So what we need to do is we need to update this payment status field as well. So what we'll do is we'll make changes to a thing, and the thing we're going to change is the current rows jobs transaction, and we want to update its payment intent status. So once again, we're going to use this get data from an external API. We're going to go to Stripe Connect get payment details. The payment intent is going to be this transaction's payment intent ID, and we're looking once more to get its status. And then finally, if the payment goes through, which it should, this will change to succeeded. And if it does go through, what I want to mark off as happening is that the job is now complete. Presumably, we're only going to authorize this payment or capture it if the freelancer has completed the job to our satisfaction. So therefore I want to mark the job as complete. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, make changes to a thing. And this time we're changing the actual job itself. And we're changing complete to yes. But I only want to do this if this definitely comes back as succeeded. So what I'm going to say is I'm only going to do this when the current row's jobs transaction payment intent status is succeeded. I'm going to have to type in succeeded here myself. Okay, so let's refresh our bubble editor and try and work out if this is going to work as expected. So let's go back here for a second, just refresh. And yeah, okay, we have this $320 payment that was uncaptured. I didn't actually do anything with the previous one. And that's our Matt Damon at testmail.com customer. So hopefully now when I click on capture, this should change from kind of gray to succeeded, and we should see it updated accordingly in our bubble database. So let's click on that. Okay, this looks promising. Job complete is changed to yes. Payment and status is changed to succeeded. You'll notice that button hid. I just put a conditional on that, so it's only visible when the job is not complete. And if we take a look at our Stripe dashboard, we'll see that the most recent payment of $320 has succeeded. What I'm also hoping to see is that 80% of this went to Brandon. So let's take a quick look. Go to our enabled accounts and take a look at Brandon. And let's take a look at his payments. And yeah, you can see there he's gotten this €295, which is roughly 80% of the $340. And then if we go back to, sorry, no, 295 is actually all of the $320, but you'll see there he only gets €236 of it. The 59.15, that's a fee that goes to Qualified, the platform. We can see that back in payments. If we go to collected fees, we'll see we get our $64, which is roughly €59. So that's been successful. That's how you do the authorize and capture method of delaying payments. And the good news is we have all the hard work done for the separate charges and transfers method as well. We need to change a couple of things on the initial checkout session part of the workflow, but it's not too much. So you might remember at the moment when we were creating a Stripe checkout session, we were using destination charges. In this case, we want to use the separate charge and transfer, and we're going to set authorize only to no. Now, you can see this is only relevant when the charge type is destination. This isn't actually going to have an effect even if it's yes, but just for good keeping, I think you're better off putting that as no. So let's do another example. If we go back to our homepage, and we'll hire Brandon for potentially the last time. We may have to do one or two more other times, but let's hire him this time for 8 hours, which should get us to $640. And what I'm expecting here, once I put in my details and pay, is that all $640 will go immediately to the platform. Brandon won't actually receive anything. But let me put in my details and we'll see how it looks on the Stripe end. Okay, so Jay Lawrence at testmail.com is our customer this time. Once again, we're being redirected to the dashboard page, and we have our second job come in here. And you can see our payment status has already come through as succeeded in this case, which makes me think that the payment has indeed gone through. So let's take a look at our Stripe dashboard again. We'll need to refresh. And I think it actually did pop up there. But you can see there $640 and it has been successful. So that payment has gone through. Now, it hasn't actually gone to Brandon just yet. Let's go back to his account. And what we should have seen if Brandon had got his cut of that, we should see another payment come in here, but that hasn't happened yet. So Jay Lawrence has made the payment, but it's gone to the platform account. And then we need to decide when's the appropriate time to send this money to Brandon. And I think the most appropriate time is probably once the job is complete, that the customer has an option to mark it off as job complete, and then the transfer can be made. So let's go back to our dashboard. And if I go back here, instead of saying capture, I'm going to say job complete. And at the moment, we're using the Stripe Connect capture payment action, and that's not what we want. So we're going to delete all of these. And what we're going to say is we're going to go down to plugins, and we're going to say Stripe Connect create transfer. And this is why it's a bit trickier when using the separate charges and transfer method, because we have to specify the exact amount that we want to go to Brandon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do current row's job, its transaction amount, and then I'm going to multiply that by 0.8. If we look at the most recent transaction entry in our database, you'll see here we have 64,000 cents, which is $640. So we're going to get 80% of that, and then we're going to send that to Brandon's account. Currency, now this is important. So the currency must match the currency of the transaction. So I manually typed in USD there. You may wish to keep track of the currency yourself just to ensure it perfectly matches that of the original transaction. And then Stripe account ID. So this is the actual Stripe account ID of Brandon. You know, it's the seller, the freelancer, whatever you want to call them, that we're transferring the funds to. So we're going to go to Stripe account ID of the freelancer and then their seller account ID. And then we're also going to make changes to a thing, and we're going to change current row's job complete to yes. That doesn't seem to be working. Of course, we don't want to do that. We just want to change the current row's job, and we want to change the field down here, complete to yes. Okay, so let's go back. And let's say we're the client and we're happy with Brandon's second job here, and we click on job complete. Okay, that job complete has gone to yes. And if we look at our Stripe dashboard now, let's refresh this, and we should hopefully see a new amount come in for Brandon in his connected account. And if we go to payments, and you can see here, yeah, $512 just came in. That was from the large payment that we saw over here, 640, and 80% of 640 is 512. So Brandon has now received his payment. So that's how you do the separate charges and transfer method. And that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully one of these two methods of delaying a payment until after a service is complete will suit your app. If you have any follow-up questions, you can let me know in the comment section.